My lonely little Hector. Anastasia has one trait that is, in my opinion, a bit aggravating. She possesses a colossal volume of information and is happy to answer many questions, but there are some she categorically refuses to answer. Sometimes this categorical nature of hers annoys me, and sometimes it simply enrages me. But even when she sees my annoyance and rage, she nonetheless maintains her position. For example, she categorically refuses to make a sample layout for a family homestead and its landscaping. If I were to do that, I'd be meddling in your creation, Vladimir, putting the brakes on your thoughts' motion. I would be the one birthing the design, not you. It would be as if it were not your own child, she says, and then she brings in various other arguments as well. But a serious and insoluble situation had come up for me that was precisely concerned with establishing a homestead. I spent a long time thinking about how to convince Anastasia to either help me or to say that the problem was insoluble so that I wouldn't spend my time and have nothing to show for it. I made another attempt to win Anastasia over and convince her to sacrifice her principles. I picked a suitable time. It was a sunny day and the taiga was fragrant. Anastasia was sitting beneath a cedar tree, weaving her golden hair into a braid. I was walking back and forth near her, mentally selecting some weighty arguments. She was the first to speak. Smiling, she asked affectionately, "Have some complicated thoughts gotten you all stirred up, Vladimir? You're right here beside me, yet at the same time in your thoughts you're far from these parts." I took a seat next to Anastasia and began to speak, trying to be as convincing as possible. "You see, Anastasia, a certain situation has come up, and I can't possibly deal with it without your help." "What situation, Vladimir?" 7 years ago, not far from the city of Vladimir, when I was having a look at the surrounding countryside, I drove onto a field in my Jeep and got stuck. The vehicle was stuck up to its underside, and the only way to pull it out was to use a tractor. While I was waiting for the tractor driver, I looked around at the abandoned field, overgrown with tall weeds. It was a rather pretty spot there. The field was surrounded by a forest, and a stream flowed in front of the forest, and not far off you could glimpse a big lake, and I thought it would be a good thing if a settlement of family homesteads were to spring up here. People would build pretty homes, dig flower beds, put in gardens, and some normal roads. And I could hardly believe it. That's exactly what happened. A year later, on that very spot, people, readers of the Ringing Cedars of Russia book series, began acquiring land so they could build family homesteads. The organizers suggested I take a hectare too, and I don't even know why myself. I agreed. Maybe right then I felt like supporting them, but I hardly did anything at all with my hectare, and sometimes I'd totally forget about it. I only called twice and asked people to sow some mustard on the land to improve the soil. The land there are not very fertile. There's a layer of fertile soil about 15 to 20 centimeters thick, and below that there's about 30 centimeters of sand, and below that nothing but clay. I totally forgot about my hectare. I have an apartment in a country house not far from town. You know of it, Anastasia, and I have a place to live in Siberia too. But then, 5 years later, I happened to come to the spot where my Jeep had gotten stuck. Even as I was driving up, I was astounded by what I saw. Can you imagine, Anastasia? Miracles do happen. Along both sides of the big lake, in the spot where there used to be a deserted space, there were homes, all different kinds, big ones, solid ones, and totally tiny ones. Driveways paved with gravel led from the main road to the homes. People had divided up the abandoned fields surrounding the lake into the plots and were building up their family homesteads. I recalled how I had dreamed there, by my stuck Jeep, about family homesteads on just one field. But here I could hardly believe it. People were settling all the fields surrounding the lake. A little island on the new and happy Russia was being born on this deserted space, overgrown with tall weeds. That means your dream was powerful, Vladimir, and correct. They embraced it, and now you've seen the way it's materializing, developing. I should have been more careful what I wished for 5 years ago by my Jeep. If I had known how everything would turn out, then I would have nipped that dream in the bud. I failed to take one thing into account, Anastasia. Now, I'll tell you everything in order, and this is where I desperately need your help. Go on then, Vladimir, and tell me everything in order. 5 years later, I was riding along a gravel road in that very same Jeep with one of the local settlers. One spot caught my eye, and I stopped the Jeep by a hectare that was overgrown with tall weeds. To the left of it, on another hectare, was a construction trailer, and next to it a beautiful home with a roof that had been put up. I didn't have any glass in the windows as of yet, but from all appearances you could see that people were making their family homestead livable. And to the right of the abandoned hectare was a beautiful wooden home, too, as well as farmyard structures and a bathhouse, and they had dug a pond. It was as if the home on the right took great pride in its flower beds, and of course in the people that had made it beautiful. And then I said to my traveling companion, I get the impression that these hectares of land have their own fates, and that their fates are tied with the people's. I think so too, my traveling companion replied. Probably each person has his own hectare of land somewhere on earth, but he doesn't know anything about it, or has forgotten about it. I went on talking. When huge fields are abandoned, individual hectares don't feel so insulted, because they are all in the same situation, like homeless children. But this is a different case. It is insulting. The hectares to the right and to the left are being set up, but this one, between the two of them, looks like an abandoned child. My companion said nothing and even looked down somehow, as if he felt awkward, both for the hectare overgrown with tall weeds and for the person who had abandoned it. And I asked, "Whose hectare is this?" "It's yours, Vladimir Nikolaevich," my traveling companion replied without raising his eyes. "Mine?" "Yes. Well, we all got together and made a driveway onto it. We laid a pipe in the ditch and covered it over with stone. We put 2 posts to mark the driveway, and we planted little fir trees on both sides, but nothing more. Each person looks after his own land." I got out of the car. On my hectare, which is almost an exact square, 100 meters by 100, and which abuts the forest, only tall weeds were growing. It didn't just seem abandoned and lonely like a homeless child. No, it was far worse off than a homeless child. Even a homeless child can go off somewhere, find himself some friends among his peers, and somehow get himself set up. My hectare couldn't do that. I set off along the perimeter of the plot and suddenly saw 2 beautiful little flowers amongst the tall weeds. It was autumn, September, but they were blooming. You couldn't see them from the road because the weeds were taller. Wow, I thought, my hectare is striving to be beautiful too. Who knows how the flower seeds got here, but my hectare grew them and is reaching out to me through these little flowers the way a child reaches out with his arms, and it is asking me to do something. And some irresistible desire arose in me, the desire to set up this plot of land, no matter what, so that it would be no worse than other people's plots, and maybe even better. I don't know why that kind of desire arose. I wasn't thinking this plot of land as a family homestead for my family. I just wanted to make everything on it right and beautiful, and I didn't want to. Suddenly, some irresistible idea arose to make it the best of all of them. Maybe later on it will draw my granddaughters to it, when it becomes the best in the world. I've returned to my hectare many times in my mind. I've sketched out the layout of various outbuildings on paper and made a list of the plants that should grow on it. I had to finish my work on the book and take care of a great number of other day-to-day affairs, but this hectare continually stirred up my thoughts in a pleasant way, and even led my thoughts away from unpleasant problems. It's amazing, but it actually, thanks to it, I've been able to overcome a whole series of day-to-day difficulties and psychological problems. You know, there really is something mysterious in man's bond with the land. Some living link stands behind this bond, and the desire to make my land beautiful and well-tended has grown stronger and stronger. A good desire has arisen within you, Vladimir. even passionate. I'm sensing it will also be of help to you. Et tu, your Hector. You yourself say that it stirs up your thoughts and leads them away from unpleasant problems. There are very big challenges connected to that Hector, Anastasia. It's kind of like a child with a congenital physical defect. What kind of defect? Nothing will grow on those lands except weeds. Vegetables won't grow, and the people in those parts don't have normal gardens. There's a village nearby. It's 200 years old, but the village residents don't have normal gardens either. Those lands there have very thin, fertile layers, and right below it, nothing but clay. In the spring, the water sits on the surface for a long time, and in the summer, too, if you get a rainy summer. Most plant roots can't penetrate the clay. If you were to dig a hole in the clay, fill it with fertile earth brought in from somewhere, then the tree might die. Water will collect in the clay pit in the rainy season. The clay will retain it and the roots will rot. Vladimir, I do not think the situation is so very hopeless as you've painted it. Tell me, how do the people feel about what is happening? Maybe they're disheartened. No, they're not disheartened. The majority of them, they sense that this is their family land for centuries to come. Some of them, even their parents, come to visit, live there for a bit, and then ask to be buried not in a cemetery but on the family homestead. Everything's fine. But the fact that the land can't bear fruit in a normal way is very upsetting to me. I even regretted having dreamt of a settlement springing up on this spot. Now, it's like I feel guilty. What steps will you take now, Vladimir, in regard to your own Hector? I don't intend to abandon it. I think there must be some way out. I also think so. You must search for it and find it. I've searched for it, but I haven't found it. So I'm asking you to please help. What are you posing, Vladimir? What task are you posing, Vladimir? Lay it out in detail. I was overjoyed that Anastasia had asked about the specifics of the task, and I decided to formulate it in the most complicated way possible. Otherwise, I thought, it wouldn't be interesting to her. I began to explain. Anastasia, I'm asking you. I ask you from the bottom of my heart, please arrange it so that apple trees and plum and pear trees and cherries and sour cherries can grow on my Hector, and on other people's too. So grapes can ripen, and good flowers and various shrubs, and also arrange it so that all this can be done at minimal expense. Something an average person can afford, not an oligarch who can put in millions of dollars. Is that all, Vladimir? No, Anastasia, that's not all. I ask you, please, I ask you from the bottom of my heart, arrange it so that all this comes to pass in no longer than 3 years. 4 or 5 years would be better. No, in 3. You've set a fine task for yourself, Vladimir. I will genuinely rejoice when you solve it. I actually got worked up to a fever pitch by that answer. I jumped to my feet, but restrained myself and didn't say anything rude. I tried to calm down, as much as that was possible, and explain. Anastasia, after all, I'm not just asking on my own behalf. Please understand. There are 300 families there on that spot. 300! They're building family homesteads. They've understood what you've said. They've felt it deeply. It's become their dream. But they're setting up their homesteads on land that is totally, totally low in productivity. It's even listed that way in the books. These people wouldn't be able to get any other kind of land. Back before Perestroika, these lands belonged to a state farm. At that time, the state worked to improve those lands with a drainage system by sinking pipes into the ground to drain off the water. But even so, aside from grain, nothing would grow on them. And now all those improvements are no longer in existence. The equipment has been stolen, and there's practically nothing that can be done. And would it even be worth doing, since it didn't help? How can we improve the productivity of the soil on my Hector now? And besides that, I can't fully imagine the layout of my entire plot. I really want to make everything beautifully and quickly. I need to catch up to the people who are 5 years ahead of me. And so here I'm asking you to help, to do this layout for me, and choose the plantings. Yes, certainly, Vladimir. The layout is very important. The layout, it is creation done with the help of the thought of the future, and then the materialization takes place. But if you farm out the layout to me, then what of yours will be materialized on that plot of land? I'm telling you, I'm also planning it myself, but I'm afraid of making a mistake. So in practice, I came up against something that would seem to be such a simple matter, like a living fence, and it turns out that it's not a simple matter at all. You can work on improving it forever, but you need just as much knowledge as a spaceship designer. You have to know what plant blooms at what time, what kind of soil it needs, how tall it will get over the summer, what kinds of flowers it has, and how they will go with the other plants and flowers, and a whole lot more. I made a plan to build something out of cob, but the experts say it will rain. The rain will wash it away. Can you imagine? I'll be building something and will hire workers, and then I will be a laughing stock. Even if you do make a mistake, Vladimir, then it will be your mistake, and it will materialize. For this reason, you need to do the layout yourself. Certainly, you can consult with someone, but in this case, the final decision must always rest within you. In the spring, Vladimir, it is all right for you to plant only annuals, and when they grow up, mow them down and enrich the soil, and do the very same the following year. I can't wait. I want to do things fast. Otherwise, I will lose more than a whole another year. Perhaps you shouldn't rush. It's better to do everything on a sound footing. What's more, if you set yourself the condition of creating everything anew, all in 1 year, then you will be extremely limited in your choice of plantings. And in the autumn, when all the annuals dry up and your living fence is left without any plantings, it might disenchant you. Now, if you do everything properly, then you will receive more positive emotions, although certainly it is also possible to do everything as a fast-track approach. Anastasia grew thoughtful for a moment, and it seemed to me that she was considering the fast-track approach, but here's what we ended up with. The obstacle of lack of faith. What you are asking for, Vladimir, can be done. I sense that it can be done, but you do not want to seek the solution yourself. Rather than spending your energy on the search, you are expending it on convincing me to find a solution. You have placed an obstacle before you consisting of lack of faith in your own powers, and as you try to convince me, you are fortifying this obstacle more and more. Beyond it, Vladimir, beyond your obstacle of lack of faith in your own powers, there are beautiful gardens blooming and glorious flowers growing, and amongst them are happy people living. Yet you cannot see all of this. The obstacle you have constructed keeps you from doing so. If I find the solution, then it will grow more fortified soil. What's more, the solution might turn out to be very simple, very, very simple, and that would be an affront to you. You will think, why ever couldn't I guess that myself? You will decide it is clear that you are not competent. You have turned to me, perhaps, thinking me a sorceress who is capable of bringing to bear powers unknown to man to solve your problem. But I am no sorceress at all. Through my feelings, I am able to take in from the universe information about everything that has been, everything that the universe knows, but every person is also capable of taking in the very same information. If he does not erect the obstacle of lack of faith in his own powers, if he is physically healthy, and if he thinks in an undistorted way, the information of the universe resembles that which a supercomputer can contain within it. A person who possesses a computer taps several keys and receives the information he needs. Now imagine, Vladimir, that instead of tapping several keys, you ask me to do that. A person is in continual need of information, and if he does not himself know how to tap these keys himself, then he will always need to have alongside him someone who does know how. Well, I know how to get information using a computer. I don't know how to get information from the universe. It's simple, very simple. Seek the solution of your problem yourself. Believe that you, precisely you, will find the correct solution, the most correct one. Well, I've been thinking about this. thinking about it for a whole year, and there is no answer. And I am telling you, the answer cannot make its way through the obstacle you have constructed, and your fervent appeal to me only confirms this. I will not solve your problem for you. Anastasia's decisive refusal to help me outraged me. Well, of course you won't. You're firm in your convictions. No arguments can make you act otherwise. I said, with bitter irony. I repeat again, there are 300 families there, and God forbid the same situation arises for people building family homesteads in other places that has arisen here. But there are 300. Vladimir, perhaps God actually gave rise to this situation. Imagine, if there had been fertile soil right there from the start, then these people would not have received these spots. Perhaps God himself arranged everything this way, and those in power deemed these lands unsuitable for growing gardens. This situation made it possible for 300 families to acquire this land and begin building family homesteads. Perhaps someone is even having a laugh at their expense and figuring that their heavenly oases won't succeed. But the information will push its way through to one of them in the form of a tiny spark, and these spots will be lit up by billions of flowers on fruit trees and in the grasses. Maybe it will push its way through, that tiny spark. But look, we want to live today, now, and with a beautiful vision of the future, not with hopelessness. All of a sudden I sensed a pleasant warmth behind my back and turned around. My son, Volodya, was standing next to me. Our eyes met, and the unusual warmth grew stronger. My son's face looked like Anastasia's, and maybe a little bit like mine when I was young. His height was nearly equal to mine. His still youthful build was distinguished by its good proportions and unusual athleticism, one expressed through ideal balance rather than artificially pumped-up muscles. My son's gaze, it resembled Anastasia's affectionate gaze, and in this gaze there was also, you see, in his gaze you could detect an inexplicable confidence, an inexplicable and somehow calm confidence. It's as if he has no idea that any difficulties even exist in life, or as if he can't imagine any situation that man can't overcome. Volodya bowed to me and then began speaking, addressing Anastasia. Mama, I heard what you were speaking of here. Mama, please allow me to address you and express my opinion. He bowed deferentially to Anastasia and silently awaited her reply. This was the first time I had seen or felt the kind of deference and love he had for Anastasia. He probably couldn't begin a conversation without her permission. Anastasia looked at our son attentively, in no hurry to answer. There was no severity in her gaze, but rather tenderness and respect. Strange, I thought. Why is she taking so long to answer this simplest request of his? The speed of her thought is great. In the space of such a long pause, she would be able to calculate a multitude of variations of the way events could play out. But here, there's nothing to calculate. Anastasia finally replied, Do speak, my dear son. Papa and I will listen to you attentively. Mama, I feel it would be good and correct for you to help Papa. I feel it's important for him to solve this problem, and if you help him, the obstacle of lack of faith in his own powers and his own intelligence will not grow more fortified, but rather smaller. It will even crumble, partially, perhaps, it will still crumble. And Volodya fell silent. Once again, Anastasia did not answer right away. For some reason, she looked at our son affectionately, smiling, and then she said, Well, of course you are right, my dear son. In the given situation, it is really necessary to help Papa. Volodya, you go ahead. Please help Papa. The two of you will find a solution, along with the other people. It will be best if you begin searching for it right away, right here, and I will not hinder you. Anastasia turned and began slowly moving away from us. After taking a few steps, she turned around and added, You are faced with co-creating a very interesting and useful deed. demonstratively and significantly perfecting the dwelling land. My son and I stood before each other. I asked him, "Tell me, Volodya, can you use the information there is in the universe the way Mama can?" Many thinkers speak of it. Stanislav Lem, a very famous writer, he said the universe is like a supercomputer. We can't get along without it. Do you have any success in utilizing it? Not in utilizing it as fast as Mama does. Why not? Because Mama is a purebred. What does that mean, a purebred? I asked in surprise. That means the Wellsprings people, breed, has been preserved in her. And why hasn't it been preserved in you? Oh, I get it. And I thought to myself, it's because I'm not a purebred. That's probably the way Anastasia explained it to him. But why the heck did she agree to have a child with a non-purebred? She couldn't find anyone else? Is that what it means? My son looked at me attentively. It's possible he understood what I was thinking about, and he said, "Mama loves you very much, Papa. Come along with me. I'll show you 2 things. Let's go, I said, agreeing, and set off following my son. When we got to the entrance to the dugout where I had spent the night with Anastasia when we first met, Volodya moved aside a stone, thereby opening a way into a longish little cave or den. He stuck his hand inside, and, as if taking something out of a safe, pulled out an empty cognac bottle and a stick. I recognized it. It was the bottle from which I had drunk the cognac when we first met, when we stopped for a rest. Wow, I thought, she kept the bottle. But what's that stick? I asked Volodya. This is the stick you wanted to hit Mama with, when, before I was born, she wouldn't agree to give me to you to raise. She could not have saved the stick, I said sheepishly. Mama says that when you were holding this stick, a great deal of energy was surging through you, and now it's very dear to her. But what does she do with them, with these things? At the very least, she might collect water in the bottle. Mama doesn't collect water in it. She often comes to the spot, moves aside the stone, takes the bottle and stick in her hand, looks at them smiling, and says some words. She's made it so that you will live forever, Papa. From time to time you will go to sleep for a moment and awaken in a new body. I was stunned. But how can you create such a thing with words? You can create a great deal with words, Papa, and especially when these words are uttered by Mama. Oh, and when she repeats them so often besides. What words are these, Volodya? I asked my son softly, and my son began, as if reciting poetry, to recite the words Anastasia would utter at this spot so often. My love, you and I have before us all eternity. Life always comes into its own. A little ray of sun will shine in the springtime. The soul will don a new body. But the mortal body, too, has reason to meekly embrace the earth. Fresh flowers and grass will rise in the springtime from our bodies. And should you, retaining your lack of faith, scatter to the winds as specks of dust in the vast universe, then I, my love, will put you back together again from the specks of dust wandering adrift for eons on end. Volodya, I also heard Anastasia say these words one day. I thought it was just some pretty phrase she was uttering. I had no idea they had a literal meaning. Yes, Papa, they have a literal meaning. Well, how do you like that? I said, drawing out the words. Many thanks to Anastasia for eternity. Papa, say thank you to Mama when you see her. Say it to her with belief in her words, and she will be very happy. I will tell her. We need to solve your problem, Papa, the problem that's now our shared problem. Let's go to the lake. We'll sketch out a layout of the hectare you're talking about in the sand, and we'll think about how to set it up. We'll think very powerfully, and we'll think until the correct solution comes to us. I walked behind my son and thought, well, but how? How can it come to us, this solution? There's no answer to be found, not in the literature and not on the internet. I'd searched for it everywhere, but hadn't found it. I had consulted with experts on agricultural methods, and they hadn't given me any valuable advice. But he, Volodya, had clearly not read anything on this question. He didn't have Anastasia's capabilities. He didn't know how to utilize information from the entire universe. Then, what could he use to help him find something there? But there he was, walking along, as if he was capable of solving the problem. We need to do something that will be more effective than meaningless expectations or searching. And I decided to talk with my son. Stop, Volodya. Let's have a seat on that tree there. I need to have a serious chat with you. All right, Papa, let's have a seat. I'll listen to you attentively. We sat down on the trunk of a fallen tree. My son laid his hands on his knees and looked at me attentively with Anastasia's gaze. But I didn't know how to start off this not very pleasant conversation with him. Not very pleasant, but necessary. Now I'm going to say some things that may not be very pleasant for you, Volodya, but I need to say them. Go ahead and say them, Papa. I can endure unpleasant things. I won't be offended. Volodya, you need to understand that Anastasia directed you to help me so that I'd stop pestering her with my questions. You won't be able to offer any help whatsoever. Not to me, and not to those people who are setting up their homesteads. You don't have Mama's capabilities, and you don't know your way around agricultural methods, and clearly you don't know what landscape design is. Am I right? Papa, I think that landscape design is when a person is planning to create a space that is beautiful. That's more or less it. But in order to make it beautiful, people who have a knack for this also spend 5 years or more studying, sharing information, and looking at various illustrations. But have you seen one well-designed homestead? When Mama and I went to the village, I saw the way on the land around the houses, people. All you've seen is village gardens, and that have no design at all. Yes, Papa, gardens, but I've imagined how I would make my own homestead. I've reflected on that often and imagined it. Just imaginings alone aren't enough. You need serious and comprehensive knowledge that you don't have. And so it follows that you have no basis for thinking. As for me, well, I've been thinking for a lot more than a year. And not just thinking, I've been consulting with experts too. It's all no use. We won't be able to get this business off the ground now simply with our thinking. But you really can help. I've hatched a plan. You should help me convince Anastasia to join in with us on solving this problem. If we give it all we've got, she'll give in. But Papa, Mama already made a decision, and her decision is help. I cannot allow myself to convince Mama to reverse her decision. I see, he can't allow himself, I cried. So when Mama tells you to help, you obey her without thinking? But when your father asks, then right away it's, I won't. So that's how you're being raised? No respect for your elders, for your father? I have great respect for you, Papa, Volodya objected calmly. I will carry out your request and help you. Now that's more like it. Now let's take a bit of a walk somewhere until evening, and then we'll go to Anastasia as if we're really upset. She won't be able to stand it and will start helping us. Papa, when I said I would help, I mean that I would work with you to solve the problem of how to make the soil more productive and make a mock-up of the landscaping for the whole homestead. Ah, so that's how it is. You mean you'll help me solve it? Do you even get... Come on, you'll get it. And I set off walking toward the shore as fast as cliff. I used a twig to sketch out a plan in the sand of the hectare abutting the forest. Volodya used various grasses and sticks, which he stuck in the sand on one side to represent the forest that abuts the side of the plot opposite the road. I had sketched the layout of the plot just so Volodya could realize, in practical terms, of how useless his attempts were. But then it happened that I myself got caught up in searching for all possible options. We spent 2 days thinking about this problem of how to arrange it so that gardens would grow up and various vegetables would mature on not fertile land. We went over and over it in our minds and discussed a great many options, but we weren't finding a solution to the problem. And we weren't finding a solution because one of the conditions was to do everything with minimal resources. If not for that, we would need if not for that condition, then with enough money, we could bring in fertile dirt on dump trucks, but we would need a minimum of 50 loads of dirt. Each load costs 17,000 rubles. It follows that we would need 850,000 rubles. The majority of the 300 families couldn't afford that. What's more, in the spring, water close to the surface might wash the fertile layer and carry it away as it ran off with the flatlands. In order to distract ourselves from what at that point seemed like a hopeless problem of improving the soil's productivity, Volodya and I began designing the landscaping for the area. Or more precisely, we attempted to arrange various structures so that they would complement each other and the surrounding area. I explained to Volodya, first of all, we need to build the outhouse and the bathhouse, then the shed, then the home, the garage, the root cellar, and the greenhouse. We have to arrange all this somehow so it will be both pretty and convenient. We constructed a mock-up of the home and sand and placed it at the center of the plot. The bathhouse and outhouse were next to the home, and the shed on the back side of the home. We created the greenhouse out of sand too. We laid a little white stick atop the oblong mound so it would look like glass or plastic sheeting. Clearly, this greenhouse wouldn't fit in anywhere. We built it first to the right of the home and then to the left, but even so, it stuck out of the overall grouping like a sore thumb. And really, I didn't think this so-called grouping itself, and to all appearances, neither did Volodya. Gazing thoughtfully at the rough design, he said, "We've made some kind of mistake." "Not just one," I added. "Looks like there's a lot of them." "But even so, I think it's one. There must be some kind of right approach, some principle, some view, or some other kind of thing that will solve all the problems at once. And what kind of new approach could that possibly be? I've laid everything out the way most people in the country do. This layout has been worked out over the centuries. It's all we've got. People just can't have been mistaken for centuries, not knowing some principle that might not even exist at all." "It does exist. I sense that." Volodya was silent for a bit and then added, "Or perhaps it will exist. We have to think, Papa, and we will find it." "And where the heck will we find it if neither you nor I is in contact with this universal database?" "Well, we'll look for it within ourselves." "Well, maybe you'll find it within you, but I'll be 60 years old soon, and I probably won't have enough time." "We'll have enough time, Papa. We'll definitely have enough time. I'll try very, very hard. I'll find it. We'll find it." I had strained my thoughts to such a great extent that even during the night, when I had fallen asleep on the fragrant grasses in the dugout, I kept going over and over all possible options in my dreams. In my dreams, the fruit trees and flowers grew quickly, right before my very eyes, but then they just as quickly wilted and fell without giving any fruit. A duel of wizards. By the middle of the second day, we were considering this option. What if we didn't drive ourselves crazy worrying about soil productivity and didn't draw the spring waters off the plot, but rather blocked the streams from draining off and chose plants that love water? This option proved somewhat sparse, and it lacked a good garden. At this point, Anastasia came up, leading our daughter by the hand. Little Nastenka probably figured that Volodya and I were playing some kind of game. She quickly sat down with us and began attentively looking over the mock-up. We had already dug out a pit on it to represent the pond. On the edge there was a mountain of sand that represented the clay, since there was a lot of clay in the soil on the plot. So, as to not sit there like a lump, I began running a stick around the perimeter of the hectare, deepening the boundary line. Then I threw away the stick and began simply looking at the sand mock-up. On all fours, Nastenka crawled right up to the mock-up, sat down at the edge, thoughtfully rubbed her little nose for some reason, and suddenly her chubby little hand started raking the sand onto the boundary line and forming a little hill. She did this slowly and carefully. When she got to the middle of one of the sides of the hectare, Volodya too began making an oblong little hill on his side. and without knowing why myself, I also began raking the sand up onto the line with both hands. What we ended up with was a hectare framed on 4 sides with an earthen mound. Silently, we looked at what we had created. Each of us, me included, was probably trying to understand what this might mean. Anastasia's voice rang out behind my back. "Ah, I've got it! How great! You found a very unusual solution. Now I will attempt to understand, to guess your intention more precisely. There, I've got it! You decided to take the already existing fertile soil on the hectare and spread a nearly meter-high mound of fertile soil along the perimeter of the hectare, and to use a portion of the fertile layer as well as sand. Great! You've increased the thickness of the fertile layer. Around the perimeter of the entire plot, you decided to make 2 little walls of cob 4 meters apart. There will be a lot of clay from digging the pond, and you can use it to construct these little walls. In this way, your mound will end up being inside a clay trench. Into this trench you will throw branches and rotting foliage from the forest, and then you will even out the earth on top of them. You will have a long 400-meter compost trench in which the elevated earth will be above regular level of the whole plot. The clay walls will prevent the fertile layer from sliding off when the spring rains fall. The elevated earth will warm up more quickly in the spring, and this will enable you to set out many plants 2 weeks earlier than usual. This means that you will have correctly understood that it makes less sense to make compost by digging a hole in the earth where water stands on the surface for a long time, since the pit will fill with water which, in soil with much clay in it, will have nowhere to go, and if you plant fruit trees in it, their roots can rot. On this mound, already the first year, you will be able to plant corn and sunflowers, and along the external sides, flowers. By autumn, already in the very first year, the hectare will be framed not simply by a mound, but by a mound on which a 2-meter-high green fence will grow. Closer on to autumn, you will cover it over, spread earth over it again, and by the next spring, this mound will grow more fertile still. When the earth firms up, you will be able to set out on it fruit trees, vegetables, and flowers. Over time, the clay walls might settle due to moisture, but even so, the settled clay will still retain the fertile layer, and the plant's roots will keep it from sliding off. And those 1/2-meter cob squares you will have built next to the pond, what are they for? Oh, don't tell me. I've got it. You will fill them with fertile soil you've brought from the forest, and you'll plant fruit trees in them, and around the trees, vegetables and flowers. It's great. What a simple and original solution you have found. You decided to raise the fertile layer in the necessary spots, increasing it to 1/2 meter. The roots will be warm and comfortable in a little hill like that, and after that the trees will grow themselves do what's needed. Each autumn the trees will cast off their foliage and it will rot, increasing the fertile layer. It's great. It's as if you pushed a button and turned on a self-nurturing biological organism. I understood that Anastasia was laying out the solution she had found, but making it seem as if we had found it, and all she was doing was figuring it out. This situation did not humiliate me in the least. I was thrilled with the solution she had found. It was simple and beautiful and wouldn't require large expenditures. But Volodya was not at all thrilled. He was staring fixedly at the mock-up of the homestead without lifting his head. My heart even felt like it would break when I understood what might be going on in his soul at that moment. He felt awkward before me for having assured me that he could find a solution, and probably before himself as well, for not carrying out the task Anastasia had given him. My son and I had grown closer over as we had working on the designs together over that day and a half, and I didn't get offended at all, any more at his stubbornness. I saw how Volodya was trying, sorting through all possible options for improving the soil's productivity, and now I felt sorry for him, and I even stopped listening to Anastasia. Really, you can't go and humiliate a child like that. It wasn't enough that the night before I'd kept telling him trying to prove he wouldn't be able to come up with anything. Now Anastasia, too, with her ensuing criticism, had totally reduced our efforts to rubble. She shouldn't act that way. Or it seemed to me that Anastasia was teasing our son on purpose, forcing him to rack his brains and speed up his thought. "And so what does this square in the middle of your design represent?" Anastasia asked. "It's the home," I replied. Volodya and I decided to situate the home right in the middle of the homestead. There are various farmyard structures around it. We've laid a road from the gates to the home, and flowers will be growing along the edges of the road. I was convinced that Anastasia would begin praising such a decision, which is why I said Volodya and I, although it had been my idea to situate the home in the middle of the homestead. I wanted to support my son at least in some way, but I had ended up doing the opposite. "Now, where is the entrance into your home?" Anastasia asked. "On the driveway side, of course. You drive right straight up to the entrance, leave your car in the parking area right in front of it, and go up to the veranda. There will be a table there. We can drink tea with friends and admire the flowers." "As well as the driveway," Anastasia added, her voice a bit needling. "As well as the driveway," I replied, "if the driveway is done in a pretty stone." "And what is situated behind the home?" "Behind the home are the pond, the garden, and a vegetable garden of some kind." "That means your garden has ended up in the backyard. You're drinking tea on the veranda with your friends, admiring the flowers, and everything that's situated in the backyard is deprived of your attention." "Vladimir, you know very well that all animals and plants need human attention. Without it, they are unable to fully fulfill their life's purpose. Plants can give a person the energies he needs, assuming they know precisely which energies he needs in the first place. But how will they learn this about you if you limit your interaction with them? Vladimir, do you know what the purpose is of interacting with the plant world?" "I do," I replied, trying to hide my disappointment that, as it turned out, I hadn't been terribly successful in placing the home. Half the acre, including the garden, really had ended up in the backyard. "And something else I don't understand," Anastasia continued, "is why you didn't remove that huge hill on the back of the pond. It weighs down the space." After hearing these words, Volodya couldn't restrain himself any more. He stood up, bowed slightly to Anastasia as he had done before, and said, "Mamma, please permit me to clarify this for you. Please, dear son, clarify it." They were standing opposite each other, son and mother, but for some reason I got the impression that they were two great wizards of the universe standing opposite each other. Now they were going to enter into a duel of intelligence and man's capabilities. My God, how beautiful Anastasia was! How enigmatic and extraordinary in her capabilities and thought was this woman who had become the person closest to me. One life, and even two, would not suffice for me to reach her level, and our son, whose facial features somewhat resembled Anastasia's, was also handsome and statuesque, but a bit foolhardy or excessively self-confident. Why was he entering into the showdown, and in my presence to boot? He himself has said that Anastasia's capacities exceed his own. Probably he's proud and decisive, but a bit foolhardy. Even so, I was rooting for Volodya with all my heart. I wanted him to emerge victorious in this competition, whatever form it might take, and it began. "This isn't just a hill, Mama," Volodya said. "Then what in the world is it?" Anastasia inquired with a smile, her voice a bit needling. "Well, how should I put it?" Slowly drawing out the words, clearly trying to think up some rational explanation for the hill, Volodya suddenly said, "It's the bathhouse, Mama." I even started, so surprisingly absurd was my son's announcement, but without knowing why myself, I affirmed this with a kind of gravitas. "Yes, it's a normal, contemporary bathhouse, a structure you really need on a homestead. If you don't have a bathhouse, then where the heck are you going to wash and have a steam bath?" I tried to draw out the time every way I could to give Volodya some way to get himself out of this fix and think of something. He would have been better off saying this mountain would be for skiing during the winter. He definitely was foolhardy. "And you can sleep in the bathhouse, too, before the home is ready." I went on, continuing my line of reasoning, but now I didn't know what to say next, and I fell silent. Strange. I see no resemblance between the mountain of clay and a bathhouse, and somehow I see no entrance at all into this bathhouse, Anastasia noted. Well, that's it, I figured. My son really put his foot in it with this bathhouse, and he's lost. No more Battle of the Wizards, however, Volodya went on. This is just a mock-up, Mama. The hill that represents the clay. We've made it out of sand, and the sand slides off, and it's difficult to show the entrance. Just as before, Volodya spoke slowly and clearly. He was thinking about something very strenuously as he did so. And suddenly it was as if his face lit up, and he kept on talking, but precisely and confidently now. When we do it out of clay, then, right here on the pond side, we will form a small entrance to an oval chamber with a cupola. The chamber's diameter will be 2 or 3 meters. The height will be 2 meters and 30 centimeters. The walls of the structure might be as thick as a meter. There are ducts in the walls to let out the smoke and hot air, and they all come together in one big duct that you can then close off with a plug. There can be the stones along the edges inside the oval chamber, and in the middle is where the fire will be lit. The interior walls of the space will heat up. You'll be able to admire the fire from the pond side, and if you don't want to admire it, you can cover the entrance with a door. When the walls heat up and the fire goes out, a person can go inside the chamber. His body will be warmed from all sides, from below and from above. The clay will emit a very healthy and beneficial warmth for the person. Yes, of course, that is a very healthy emission, Anastasia said, now thoughtfully, especially if you were to place a vessel in there containing an infusion of medicinal herbs. Information about such a bathhouse did not exist in the universe, and you could not have received it. This means you have added this information to the universe, and now you... I looked at the little mountain of earth in the mock-up and imagined this bathhouse, and around it flower beds, roses, and the bank of a beautiful pond, and even just from imagining it, some kind of most beneficial warmth really was spreading through my body. I intuitively understood that Volodya had thought up something that hadn't previously existed. That made me extraordinarily joyful, as if my body and soul were both rejoicing. I began thinking once again about the overall homestead project, about how awesome and beautiful Anastasia was, both in body and mind. Naturally, she isn't indifferent to this project, and perhaps she deserved more credit than anyone for solving this problem of how to improve the soil productivity, a problem that we had previously considered hopeless. Wow, what a thing to think of! Raising a regular compost pit just above ground level and turning it into a living fence. That meant she'd agreed to help after all, her principles notwithstanding, to help in some discreet way. I walked up to Anastasia and slowly whispered, "You're the one who thought all of this up. You found the solution. Thank you, Anastasia." "We thought it up together, Vladimir," Anastasia said, also in a whisper, "and perhaps those 300 families you spoke of deserve the most credit." "But they weren't here while we were thinking." "Perhaps they weren't here, but they were there, on their hectares, also contemplating the best steps to take. And just imagine, Vladimir, what if they didn't exist at all? Would you have thrown the whole family into a tizzy? Would you really have racked your brains so and demanded with such agitation that we find a solution? If they did not exist, you might not have given this question the slightest of thoughts. Perhaps they, these 300 families, are the main figures behind this project." "Yes, I agree. We created it all together. And thank you even more for that together, Anastasia." And then I added, "And thank you, too, for the eternity you've given me. I was at the spot where you hid the empty bottle." Anastasia added, with slightly downcast eyes, "And the stick?" "And the stick," I confirmed, and started laughing. Anastasia also started laughing, a rolling, light-hearted laughter, and even the little Nastinka began hopping around near the mock-up, swinging her little hands and laughing. Only Volodya, indifferent to what was going on, was still looking intently and thoughtfully at the mock-up. And I suddenly felt unbearably sorry for my son. Despite the fact that he had managed to think up the extraordinary bathhouse, he, naturally of course, still considered that he hadn't managed the task Anastasia had set for him. And he probably felt uncomfortable before me, too, for not listening to me, for arguing that we'd get along without Anastasia. He really had tried, but I wanted to support him somehow, cheer him up, but how could I do that? I didn't know. Volodya was looking at the mock-up intently, most likely trying to come up with something else of his own on it. He didn't understand that we had already come up with what was most important. Late in the evening, before going to sleep, I asked Anastasia, "But where do Volodya and Nastenka sleep?" "In various spots," Anastasia replied. "Nastenka will sleep with me sometimes." "Why are you inquiring about this, Vladimir?" "Oh, no reason. I just wanted to talk with Volodya about something." "Then call him." "How do I call him? Do I shout or what?" "Just call him. He'll hear." I called him, and a short time later I saw our son coming in my direction. As before, he was intent as could be. When Volodya got closer to me, I asked him, "Volodya, when did you come up with the mountain of clay being a bathhouse, and why didn't you tell me about that earlier?" "I decided to say that when Mama began criticizing our design and the clay mountain in our design. I decided to call it a bathhouse because you, Papa, told me, first of all, we need to build the outhouse and the bathhouse on the plot. The mountain was a bit too large to be an outhouse, and I decided to call it a bathhouse. But then you began talking about how it would be arranged and used. Did you think that up on the fly, just like that, or maybe you're able to use the universal information after all, like Mama?" "I can't do it the way Mama does, Papa, but it's possible that there's some benefit in that, too. What I'm unable to receive information about, I try to quickly think that up on my own, and sometimes that works. I'll say it works like a charm." "You're a real inventor. I can't get your invention out of my mind. I even decided it's to make up a working model when I get back. I'll buy a clay pitcher and put a hole in its base and cover its mouth with a cover of some sort with a hole for a pipe. I'll light a candle inside it and leave it for an hour or two, instead of a fire, so we can see how it'll heat up. Only a pitcher's walls are thin, so we won't have a perfectly accurate model." "Papa, apply a layer of clay around the pitcher and the model will be more accurate." "Perfect. I'll apply a layer of clay. Now, Volodya, please forgive me. Well, you know, for being so hot-headed and saying that you've nothing to think with. Don't be angry with me." "I've never gotten angry at you, Papa," he answered calmly. "And I'm not angry at Mama. And of course you got it. That she was only pretending that we'd thought up that earthen mound along the hectare's perimeter. Actually, she and Nastenka gave us a hint." "Yes, Papa, I got all that. But it's not important who thought it up. What's important is that the problem with the soil has now been solved. Good for Anastasia, right, Volodya?" "Mama challenged us to a duel, Papa." "A duel? She challenged us?" "I had that kind of feeling when you were standing opposite each other." "Is that a kind of game, Volodya, to develop the mind? Is that it?" "You could say it's a game, but to be more precise, it's a duel." "It's not a fair duel. Anastasia possesses information as broad as the universe. But we don't have that opportunity. How can we duel under those circumstances?" Volodya heard out my arguments and replied with calm confidence, "I have accepted the challenge, Papa." "Well, there was no point in accepting it. The chances are 100% you'll lose. Then you'll get upset, the way you got upset today. I saw the way you were sitting there all upset, hanging your head when Anastasia was talking about the earthen mound, about the home in the middle and the backyard. And here you'll get even more upset. I must not lose, Papa. If I lose, it will make Mama sad." "Well, then she should surrender to you in some non-obvious way so that she herself won't be sad afterwards." "Mama can't surrender." "Oh, Volodya, Volodya, sometimes it seems to me you're a bit foolhardy." "Okay, what's happened has happened. You go get some sleep, Volodya. I'll go, too, and I'll think about how best to situate the home on the hectare. Maybe I'll think of something." "Yes, Papa, you need to get a good sleep. I wish you a serene sleep, Papa." My son and I went our separate ways, but I couldn't go to sleep right away. I said to Anastasia, "Don't wait up for me. Go to sleep on your own, Anastasia. I need to think about something for a bit." I walked around by the entrance to the dugout in the light of the white Siberian night, thinking about how to help Volodya. From time to time, I would look at the sleeping Anastasia. She was sleeping on her side, curled up into a ball with her palm beneath her head and smiling a little about something in her sleep. She was smiling like a child, with gentle beauty. But the day before, she sure had ripped our layout apart mercilessly. She'd called the spot where we'd put the home in the mock-up incorrect. Half the hectare had ended up as the backyard, she'd said. Of course, that really was the case. I needed to recall how homes were situated in the landscape design journals. Of course, Volodya wouldn't be able to solve the problem of where to situate the structures, since he didn't have this information. I'd have to think everything through. Otherwise, he'd lose all confidence in his own capabilities. I had such a strong desire to help my son that I sensed that I wouldn't fall asleep until I had thought up something useful. I've seen lots of country homes with various structures on plots of land, so that meant it was up to me to find the correct solution. But it wasn't coming. Most of the houses I had occasion to see basically had their windows looking out over the driveway. It was getting long past midnight, but I was still walking back and forth along the dugout, sorting through various options for situating the home and farmyard structures. And suddenly it came to me. It came to me just like that, somehow, as if it just erupted. And I really liked what came to me. Well, I'll give her an answer tomorrow. Yeah, I'll answer her. I started imagining the way, the next day, I'd answer Anastasia's remark about the backyard. I'd start in an offhand way. "Anastasia, you were saying something here yesterday about the spot where we had put the home, about some kind of backyard." "Yes," she'd say, "I was saying that half of your hectare has ended up in the backyard." "That's not true, Anastasia. That's not the way it is at all. You just failed to notice a little indentation on the mock-up. That's a veranda that goes around the whole home. When it's hot, we'll sit on the shady side with our friends, along the wall that's on the other side of the house from the entrance. We'll sit and admire the garden and the flower beds, and thus you don't have any backyard. An open veranda runs all around the house." "Yes, that's true," Anastasia will say. "I didn't notice that." I decided I'd come up with something good, and quietly, so as not to disturb her sleep, I laid down on the fragrant bed next to the sleeping beauty. During the night I had a strange dream about the bathhouse. It was as if I was walking into it and closing the door behind me, and the bathhouse lifted up off the ground and was flying into the sky, picking up more and more speed.